Stop scrolling. What you're about to hear will shatter everything you thought you knew about Hollywood's golden age. Those glamorous photos, those dazzling smiles, those perfect lives immortalized on silver screens, all of it was a carefully constructed lie. Behind the velvet curtains of the Dream Factory, some of the brightest stars in history were quietly destroying themselves, and the system that made them famous watched it happen. Some were crushed by scandal, others drowned in addiction, a few simply broke under the weight of their own fame. You believed the fairy tale, didn't you? The rags to riches stories, the happily ever afters, the notion that talent and beauty guarantee happiness. Forget all of it. What I'm about to show you is the truth Hollywood has spent a century trying to bury. We're going to examine 10 stars who lost control so completely that their lives became cautionary tales. Each story is darker than the last, and by the time we reach the final name, you'll understand just how ruthless the entertainment industry really was. That last revelation will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about America's most famous icon. But before we descend into this darkness, do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel and hit that like button, because what you're about to learn, they never wanted you to know. Let's begin with a name that once meant comedy gold, but became synonymous with Hollywood's first great scandal. Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle was the king of silent comedy in 1921. He earned more money than almost anyone in Hollywood, commanding a salary that would be worth millions today. Audiences adored his physical comedy, his timing, his ability to make an entire theater erupt in laughter without speaking a single word. He was untouchable, or so it seemed. Studio executives saw him as a cash machine. The public saw him as a lovable, gentle giant. Everyone saw what they wanted to see. But on Labor Day weekend in 1921, everything changed in a single afternoon at the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco. Arbuckle threw a party in his suite, a lavish affair with bootleg liquor flowing freely despite prohibition. Among the guests was a young actress named Virginia Rappe. What happened in that suite remains disputed to this day, but the outcome was undeniable. Rappe fell violently ill during the party, suffering from severe abdominal pain. Within days, she was dead. The tabloid press, smelling blood in the water, descended like vultures. They printed stories that grew more lurid with each edition. Arbuckle was accused of rape and manslaughter. The details published were graphic, sensational, and largely fabricated, but the public devoured them anyway. The truth was far more complicated. Medical evidence suggested Rappe had a pre-existing condition, a bladder inflammation that could have been aggravated by alcohol. Multiple witnesses gave conflicting accounts of what occurred in that room, but none of that mattered. Hollywood's first major sex scandal had found its villain, and Roscoe Arbuckle was a man whose physical appearance made him an easy target. The prosecution put him on trial 3 times. Twice, juries deadlocked. The third time, they acquitted him so decisively that they issued a written apology, stating that a great injustice had been done to him. It didn't matter. The damage was absolute and irreversible. The studio system that had enriched itself on Arbuckle's talent abandoned him instantly. His films were pulled from distribution. His contracts were voided. The same executives who had counted their profits from his comedies now pretended they'd never known him. Hollywood's censorship body, eager to prove its moral authority, banned him from appearing on screen. The man who had made millions laugh was suddenly unemployable. He tried directing under a pseudonym. He begged for work. He died in 1933, just 1 day after signing a contract for a comeback film, his heart giving out at age 46. The comeback never happened. The laughter had stopped 12 years earlier. Arbuckle's story reveals Hollywood's first unwritten rule. The system protects itself, never the artist. When scandal threatens profits, the star becomes expendable, regardless of guilt or innocence. But if Arbuckle was destroyed by a single weekend, the next star on our list was destroyed slowly, methodically, over the course of her entire childhood. She was supposed to be Dorothy, the innocent girl from Kansas who believed in rainbows and happy endings. Judy Garland's voice could break hearts and mend them in the same breath. When she sang "Over the Rainbow" in 1939, audiences heard pure magic. They didn't hear the pills. They didn't hear the studio executives who told a teenage girl she was too fat. They didn't hear the nightmare that was unfolding behind every take. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer didn't simply discover Judy Garland. They shaped her, carefully, relentlessly, and in doing so, they erased the person behind the talent. Born Frances Gumm, she was performing on stage before most children could read. By the time MGM signed her as a teenager, she already had years of professional experience. The studio recognized her extraordinary ability, but they also believed she needed to be managed. She didn't fit the narrow image Hollywood preferred, and the production schedules were exhausting even for adults. To keep her functioning under constant pressure, the studio introduced a rigid medical routine that regulated her energy, sleep, and weight. It was presented as professional care. In reality, it placed her body and mind into a cycle she never truly escaped. She was expected to work long hours, maintain an unrealistic physical standard, and perform at peak levels without pause. Every detail of her life was supervised: her diet, her appearance, her daily routine. Nothing was her own. Authority figures reportedly mocked her insecurities rather than protecting her. What should have been guidance became control. What should have been care became damage. By early adulthood, Garland was struggling to live without the systems imposed on her as a child. The habits formed under studio supervision followed her into independence. Her career continued, but stability did not. Personal relationships collapsed, financial problems mounted, her health declined. The very industry that had profited from her brilliance distanced itself when she could no longer meet its demands. Judy Garland died in London in 1969 at the age of 47. Her death was ruled accidental, but her decline had begun decades earlier. The cost of fame had been quietly accumulating since her childhood, long before the world noticed anything was wrong. MGM never publicly reckoned with its role. The machine simply moved forward. If Garland was controlled until she broke, the next star unraveled by indulging the image Hollywood celebrated. Errol Flynn represented adventure, confidence, and effortless charm. On screen, he was the perfect hero. Off-screen, he lived with the same intensity, constant socializing, excess, and a lifestyle with no limits. At first, it enhanced his legend. Over time, it consumed him. Flynn relied heavily on alcohol, and as the years passed, it began to shape his behavior and health. His performances changed, his physical condition deteriorated. The vitality that once defined him slowly faded, replaced by fatigue and unpredictability. A highly publicized court case in the early 1940s brought unwanted attention to his private life. Though he was cleared legally, the event exposed the darker side of unchecked celebrity and privilege. From that point on, public perception and personal reality drifted further apart. By his 40s, Flynn's health problems were impossible to ignore. His appearance aged rapidly. His reliability declined. Leading roles disappeared, replaced by smaller projects far from his former glory. The man who once embodied Hollywood fantasy became a cautionary example of what happens when excess goes unchallenged. Errol Flynn died of a heart attack on October 14, 1959. He was 50 years old, though years of strain had taken a visible toll on his body. Medical examinations showed serious long-term damage to his health, the result of a lifestyle that placed constant stress on his heart and organs. One physician later remarked that Flynn's body reflected decades of physical wear far beyond his age. It was the cost of living without limits. Hollywood remembered him as a symbol of romance and adventure. What went largely unspoken was how the industry had tolerated his excesses for as long as he remained profitable. His reputation was protected, his behavior overlooked, and meaningful intervention never came. When his market value faded, so did the concern. The legend survived. The man did not. But Flynn's decline, however tragic, was shaped by his own choices. The next star's fate was shaped by an industry that resisted anyone who refused to conform. Frances Farmer was intellectually independent in a system that demanded obedience. She questioned her roles, challenged authority, and spoke openly about her beliefs. In an era when Hollywood valued silence and compliance above individuality, this made her a liability. Her talent was unmistakable. Farmer brought emotional depth and realism to her performances that set her apart from her peers. Yet, she openly criticized the limitations placed on her work and aligned herself with political ideas that studios viewed as dangerous during a period of growing fear and suspicion. Her behavior became a public spectacle. Headlines framed her as unstable and unmanageable. The studios reinforced that narrative, distancing themselves rather than offering support. What they saw was not a gifted artist in distress, but a problem they could not control. And in Hollywood, independence was often treated as something that needed to be corrected. In 1943, Farmer's mother had her committed to a psychiatric institution. What followed was a descent into hell that makes your skin crawl to contemplate. The hospitals she was sent to were nightmares, masquerading as treatment facilities, overcrowded, understaffed, brutal places where patients were subjected to experimental procedures with no regard for their humanity. Farmer endured insulin shock therapy, which induced comas as a supposed treatment for mental illness. She may have been subjected to hydrotherapy, where patients were blasted with high-pressure water. There are reports, disputed but persistent, that she was lobotomized. Whether or not that particular horror occurred, what definitely happened was systematic dehumanization. Farmer spent years cycling through institutions and brief releases, each commitment stripping away more of who she had been. The rebellious, brilliant actress was replaced by a quiet, compliant woman who spoke in measured tones and avoided confrontation. When she finally emerged permanently in the 1950s, she was a shell. She worked at a hotel, she sorted laundry. She lived in obscurity until her death from cancer in 1970. Hollywood's role in Farmer's destruction was indirect but unmistakable. The industry had created an environment where nonconformity was punished so severely that it could justify institutionalization. They had contributed to the narrative that Farmer was crazy, difficult, impossible. And when she disappeared into the psychiatric system, they simply cast someone else in her roles and moved on. Her story became a cautionary tale whispered among actors. Don't make trouble, or you'll end up like Frances Farmer. The system didn't need to destroy Farmer directly. They just needed to create conditions where her destruction was inevitable. If Farmer was broken by the system's cruelty, the next star was broken by a single moment of bad luck that spiraled into catastrophe. Montgomery Clift was beautiful in a way that transcended conventional handsomeness. His face had an almost sculptural quality, sensitive and intense, capable of expressing profound emotion with the smallest gesture. He was one of the finest actors of his generation, bringing method acting techniques to Hollywood before they became mainstream. He was also deeply troubled, wrestling with his sexuality in an era when being gay could destroy a career. Then came the night that divided his life into before and after. On May 12, 1956, Clift left a dinner party at Elizabeth Taylor's house and drove his car into a telephone pole. The crash nearly killed him. His face, that perfect instrument of his craft, was shattered. Teeth were knocked out. His jaw was broken. His nose was fractured. When Taylor reached him, she had to pull teeth from his throat to keep him from choking. Plastic surgery could repair some of the damage, but not all of it. More importantly, it couldn't repair what broke inside him. Before the accident, Clift drank and used pills, but he maintained some control. After the accident, control became impossible. The physical pain was severe and chronic. Doctors prescribed painkillers, and Clift took them in quantities that went far beyond therapeutic use. He combined them with alcohol, creating a chemical cocktail that kept him in a constant state of semi-consciousness. His film performances after 1956 show a man struggling to function. His speech became slurred. His movements were uncertain. The intensity that had made him brilliant became erratic and unfocused. Directors who worked with Clift after the accident reported showing up to set unable to remember his lines, sometimes unable to stand straight. John Huston, directing him in The Misfits, had to shoot Clift's scenes in the morning before the drinking started. His co-stars watched him deteriorate and felt helpless. Elizabeth Taylor, who loved him deeply, tried repeatedly to intervene. Nothing worked. Clift had disappeared into his addiction so completely that the person he had been no longer existed. Montgomery Clift died of a heart attack on July 23, 1966, at the age of 45. His system was so compromised by years of mixing alcohol and drugs that his body simply gave up. In his final years, he had become almost unemployable, appearing in small roles that were beneath his talent. The accident had taken his face. The addiction had taken everything else. Hollywood had watched it happen and done nothing substantive to help. They had used him when he could still function and discarded him when he couldn't. His story is one of tragedy compounded by neglect. The system that profited from his talent failed to protect him from himself. But Clift's fall was at least gradual. The next star's descent was so rapid and complete that she went from fame to poverty in what felt like a heartbeat. Veronica Lake's hair was as famous as her face. That blonde cascade that fell over one eye became her trademark, imitated by women across America in the early 1940s. She was the epitome of film noir glamour, sultry and mysterious, the kind of woman who could destroy a man with a glance. For a brief moment, she was everywhere. Then, she was nowhere. Lake's problems were multiple and mutually reinforcing. She was an alcoholic whose drinking made her unpredictable and hostile on set. She had a reputation for being difficult that wasn't entirely unearned. She clashed with directors, arrived late, and sometimes refused to perform. The studios tolerated this behavior while she was profitable, but her bankability had a short shelf life. By the late 1940s, her star was fading. By the 1950s, it had gone out completely. What's striking about Veronica Lake's fall is the velocity. One year she was a leading lady. The next, she was unemployable. Hollywood didn't ease her out gently. They dropped her like a stone. She tried to find work on stage. She tried television. Nothing stuck. Her alcoholism worsened, fueled by desperation and humiliation. She went through divorces and financial disasters. By the 1960s, Veronica Lake was working as a bartender in New York City, serving drinks to people who vaguely recognized her but couldn't quite place where they'd seen her before. Journalists who discovered her in these reduced circumstances wrote about it with a mixture of pity and fascination. Here was a woman who had once been a Hollywood goddess, now living in near poverty, her beauty faded, her career a distant memory. Lake gave interviews where she tried to maintain dignity, but the subtext was always the same. This is what happens when Hollywood is done with you. The industry takes what it needs and discards the rest. There is no safety net. There is no pension for faded glamour. Veronica Lake died of hepatitis and kidney failure on July 7, 1973, at the age of 50. She died essentially broke, her final years spent in obscurity and illness. The studio system had used her image to sell millions of dollars worth of tickets, but when she needed help, there was none. Her story illustrates the disposability of Hollywood talent. Once the public moves on, so does the industry. What you did yesterday means nothing if you can't perform today. If Lake's descent was defined by abandonment, the next star's tragedy was defined by something even darker, the complete erosion of hope. Charles Boyer was elegance personified. With his French accent and continental sophistication, he played romantic leads with a gravity and depth that made audiences believe in love. He was intelligent, cultured, a man of substance both on screen and off. His marriage to British actress Pat Patterson was considered one of Hollywood's true love stories, lasting over 40 years. Everything about his public image suggested control, grace, and stability. It was a lie by omission. Charles Boyer's private life carried a weight few people ever saw. For years, he quietly struggled with emotional darkness while presenting the image of a refined, composed, leading man. In 1965, his world was shaken by the death of his son Michael, who had faced serious personal struggles. The loss left a wound Boyer never fully recovered from, though he continued working and maintaining the appearance of stability. Not long after, his wife Pat was diagnosed with a serious illness. Boyer devoted himself entirely to her care, stepping away from much of his public life to remain by her side. When she passed away in August of 1978, something essential in him disappeared. Friends later said that she had been his emotional anchor for decades. Charles Boyer died 2 days later. He left no explanation, but those closest to him understood the depth of his grief. His passing became a quiet reminder that professional success offers no protection against profound loss. Acclaim, wealth, and admiration meant little when measured against the absence of the people who mattered most. Hollywood struggled to understand his death, framing it as tragic and poetic rather than confronting the reality beneath it. Boyer's life revealed an uncomfortable truth the industry preferred to avoid. Fame cannot replace human connection, and success cannot shield anyone from despair. But grief, at least, is something people can recognize. The next tragedy unfolded differently, a slow physical collapse hidden behind glamour. Jean Harlow was marketed as unstoppable energy and confidence. Her iconic platinum hair and carefree image were carefully engineered by the studio system. Behind the scenes, the process was harsh, damaging, and physically exhausting. The persona audiences adored concealed a young woman whose health was steadily declining. Harlow experienced recurring health issues that worsened over time. She often minimized her condition, aware that stepping away from work could threaten her career. By 1937, she was visibly unwell. Makeup concealed the signs, but the strain was evident to those around her. Fatigue, discomfort, and repeated medical warnings went largely unaddressed. Despite clear signs that she needed rest and treatment, production continued. Contracts had to be fulfilled, schedules had to be maintained. The priority was completion, not recovery. When Harlow could no longer continue, it was already too late. Jean Harlow died in June of 1937, at just 26 years old due to severe illness. The film she had been working on was completed using stand-ins and careful editing, then released to commercial success. Audiences celebrated a performance without realizing it was her final one. Her death exposed the cold reality of the studio system. Talent was valued primarily as a resource. When the body failed, replacement followed. Public mourning was accompanied by private calculations, and the machine moved on without hesitation. If Harlow was lost to physical neglect, the next star was slowly erased by identity. Peter Lorre's appearance defined his fate. His distinctive features and unsettling intensity made him unforgettable. After his breakthrough performance in M, Hollywood locked onto a single image, the perfect villain. He was repeatedly cast as criminals, outsiders, and threats. The roles brought fame, but they also confined him. No matter his range or ambition, the industry saw only what fit its expectations. Over time, Lorre became trapped inside the characters he portrayed, struggling to escape a reputation that followed him everywhere. His talent opened the door, but it also became the cage. Lorre wanted to play other parts, to show his range, but the studios wouldn't allow it. He was too valuable as a villain. The more he played these roles, the more the public associated him with darkness. People began to believe the characters were reflections of the man. They crossed the street to avoid him. Children were frightened by his presence. The line between Peter Lorre, the actor, and the monsters he portrayed blurred until it disappeared entirely. The psychological toll of this typecasting was severe. Lorre began using morphine, initially for gallbladder problems, but the addiction quickly spiraled beyond medical necessity. The drug helped him escape the trap his career had become, but it also made the trap inescapable. He became dependent, unreliable, difficult to work with. His health deteriorated. His once sharp mind became foggy and paranoid. He saw conspiracies everywhere, convinced that people were plotting against him. Some of this paranoia was chemically induced. Some of it was the rational response of a man watching his life implode. By the 1950s and 1960s, Lorre was taking whatever roles he could get, appearing in low-budget horror films and television episodes. He was a shadow of the talented actor who had stunned audiences in M and Casablanca. The morphine had taken too much. He died of a stroke on March 23, 1964, at age 59, his body worn out by decades of addiction and stress. Hollywood remembered him fondly at memorial services, praising his distinctive talent while conveniently forgetting that they had used that distinctiveness to trap him in a cage of monsters. Lorre's tragedy is one of artistic suffocation. The industry found what it wanted from him and refused to let him be anything else. When that singular use destroyed him, They expressed sadness, but no responsibility. They had gotten their money's worth. But all of these tragedies, as dark as they are, pale in comparison to the final name on our list, the most famous woman in the world, the ultimate symbol of Hollywood glamour, the star whose death remains shrouded in questions and suspicions. Marilyn Monroe wasn't born. She was created. Norma Jean Mortensen was the raw material, a damaged girl from a broken home with a desperate need to be loved. Hollywood took that raw material and manufactured an icon. They bleached her hair platinum. They taught her to walk, talk, and breathe in a way designed to drive men wild. They turned her into a fantasy, the ultimate sex symbol. And in the process, they erased the person she might have been. Monroe's life reads like a catalog of abandonment. Her mother was institutionalized when she was young. She grew up in foster homes and an orphanage. She married at 16 to escape that system, divorcing 3 years later. She posed nude for calendars because she needed money. A studio executive saw the photographs and saw potential. They signed her. They created Marilyn Monroe. And Norma Jean disappeared. The woman the world saw on screen was confident, sexual, joyful. The woman who existed in private was anxious, insecure, dependent on pills to sleep and pills to wake. She cycled through barbiturates and amphetamines the same way Judy Garland had, except Monroe was doing it to herself as an adult, trying to manage the pressure of being the world's most desired woman while feeling fundamentally undesirable beneath the image. She was late to sets, sometimes by hours. She forgot her lines. She required dozens of takes for simple scenes. Directors found her maddening. Co-stars found her difficult. Nobody seemed to understand that they were watching a woman drowning. Monroe's marriages reflected her desperation for stability. Joe DiMaggio loved her, but couldn't handle the public nature of her sexuality. Arthur Miller loved her mind, but grew frustrated with her chaos. Neither could save her from herself. She had affairs with powerful men, including, allegedly, President John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert. These relationships, if they occurred, were transactions more than romance. Monroe trading her body and her fame for proximity to power, hoping that somehow it would fill the emptiness inside her. By 1962, Marilyn Monroe was no longer able to meet the relentless demands placed upon her. Production schedules became overwhelming, expectations unforgiving. The industry that had once celebrated her now viewed her struggles as an inconvenience. At 36, she was already being quietly pushed aside. On August 5, 1962, Marilyn Monroe passed away in her Los Angeles home. Her death marked the end of a life lived under extraordinary pressure and constant public scrutiny. What followed was confusion, speculation, and decades of debate. But none of it changed the central truth of her story. Marilyn Monroe was shaped by fame so completely that there was little room left for the person behind the image. The world knew the symbol, the smile, the fantasy. Very few cared to understand the individual carrying that weight. She became an idea rather than a human being, valued for what she represented rather than who she was. The industry benefited enormously from her presence, yet offered little protection when the cost of maintaining the image became unbearable. Admiration was abundant. Understanding was not. The distance between the public persona and private reality grew wider with each passing year. Her life stands as one of the clearest examples of how fame can isolate rather than protect. Success amplified attention but did not provide safety. Recognition did not bring peace. What the world celebrated, it also consumed. These 10 stories together reveal a pattern larger than any single life. They reflect an industry built to maximize visibility, productivity, and profit, often without regard for long-term human consequences. Talent was refined, shaped, and displayed. When it faltered, it was replaced. Across the golden age, the pattern repeated itself. Young performers faced impossible expectations. Independent voices were sidelined. Physical appearance determined value. Personal struggles were ignored when they conflicted with schedules and contracts. While times have changed, the core dynamic remains familiar. Public success still comes with intense pressure. Personal well-being is still often treated as secondary to output. Careers still end abruptly when they no longer serve commercial goals. These stories are not exceptions. They are reminders of what can happen when human beings are reduced to images and expectations. For every famous name remembered, countless others faded quietly from view. What makes these figures unforgettable is not only their success, but the cost at which it came. They reached extraordinary heights, yet found little refuge there. Their lives stand as quiet warnings that fame does not equal fulfillment, and recognition does not guarantee care. You looked behind the curtain now. You saw the machinery. The question is whether anything will change. History suggests it won't. There are new stars rising right now, young people with extraordinary gifts who believe they'll be different, that they'll maintain control, that they won't end up like Judy Garland or Marilyn Monroe or Montgomery Clift. Most of them are wrong. The machine is still hungry. It's always hungry, and it's very good at what it does. These 10 names are just the beginning. The truth behind Hollywood's golden facade runs deeper than any single video could explore. But now you know enough to look at those classic films differently. When you see Judy Garland singing "Over the Rainbow," you'll know about the pills. When you see Marilyn Monroe's smile, you'll wonder what she was really feeling. When you see any star from that era, you'll ask yourself what price they paid for the privilege of entertaining you. The Dream Factory built dreams on nightmares. Remember that the next time someone tells you about the good old days of Hollywood, remember these names. Remember what was done to them. Remember that behind every classic film is a human cost that was never calculated in the box office returns. This is the truth they never wanted you to know. Now it's yours to carry.